So before I did the cliche YouTuber thing and bought a Tesla Model 3, I was really worried about the road trip situation. Would it be reasonable to take the car on long road trips, and how much hassle would it be to charge the car? Would I be worried about running out of battery midway through the trip? How comfortable would it be, and how would the autopilot work in real life? So this is the video I wish I would have seen before I bought the car. It is not a review of the Tesla Model 3, it's a review of what it's like to take the Tesla Model 3 on a 1,400-mile road trip to the Scottish Highlands in torrential rain and freezing weather with a car full of 5 people. And I will tell you up front, it was an interesting experience for a lot of different reasons. So let's start with the good stuff, and then we'll talk about the not so good stuff. So let's start with comfort, acceleration, and autopilot. Thankfully, the car is really comfortable as the driver, not quite as the passengers, but we'll come to that in a second. It's really comfortable as the driver. When you sit down in the seat, it genuinely feels like you're sitting in a sofa, and it's got like fancy electronic seat controls, so you can set up the height to whatever you like. You can raise the seat up and down. It's even got a lumbar back support thing that you can sort of use to sort of massage yourself if you get it in exactly the right position and really kind of lean back against it. But in general, it's very, very solid and very comfortable. All right, this car is really not good for the back pain.
You have a good nap for it.
Oh, my lower back. This feels absolutely horrendous.
No, but I'm getting grateful, so I'm gonna say yeah.
The only thing is, for me, after about 2 hours of driving, I was getting consistent kind of lower back pain. Now this would happen in my old car as well, so I think maybe that's just me, but the Tesla Model 3 did not cure my lower back pain problem after sitting in that one kind of position for 2 hours. It's also pretty good because you can save different like driver configurations to the car. So if I'm driving, I have my seat in a certain position, but then if my mum wants to drive, she can just select her profile and the car will the seat will automatically move until it's in the position that she wants it at. But overall, comfort, nothing to complain about. I do genuinely enjoy driving the car. It genuinely feels very comfortable. And just in general, when I'm driving the Tesla Model 3, I kind of feel like it feels like a joy to drive. And I think that's partly because of the comfort. Let's talk about acceleration now. And the acceleration is absolutely ridiculous. I've got the Tesla Model 3 long range version, so I did not pay for the performance version, and I've not paid for any acceleration upgrades. The 0 to 60 of my version without any upgrades is 3.4 seconds. And from 0 to 60, it feels genuinely sickening at times. And occasionally when I have new people in the car and someone's like, oh, hey, I've heard the acceleration is really fast. Can we try it out? And I'm like, are you sure about this? And like, we sit down, we get the car to 0, and then we just floor the accelerator and go straight. People are always like, oh my God, oh God. And then they kind of feel sick, so it kind of feels sick afterwards. The car actually has 2 driving modes. It's got acceleration standard and it's got acceleration chill. Now, I actually prefer to drive it on acceleration chill, where the acceleration is more manageable and it feels like a smoother drive. Whereas on acceleration standard, that's when you really notice it, when you're like sort of at a traffic light and there are 3 cars and you're all going in the same direction. At that point, I flip it to standard and I'm like, all right, lads, here we go. It goes green light, floor the accelerators, zoom so far ahead of everyone else, leave them in my dust or whatever the phrase is. But yeah, the acceleration is absolutely mental. If you want, you can pay £1,500, I think it's $1,500 as well in America, for another over-the-air software upgrade that makes it go up to 2.9 seconds, 0 to 60. I think 3.4 seconds is too fast, personally, for me. I'm not much of a car guy. I'm a bit conservative, a little bit vanilla. And so I'm not gonna pay for this £1,500 2.9 second acceleration upgrade because it's just completely unnecessary. Thirdly, let's talk about the autopilot. Now, the autopilot is absolutely incredible. Technically, it's not really an autopilot. It is instead a traffic-aware cruise control. So what that means is that it's gonna accelerate up to the speed limit, but it's gonna make sure you're a safe distance behind the car in front of you, and it's gonna follow the markings on the road. Now, this is actually really, really useful. It basically functions as an autopilot if you're on kind of a long stretch of road for a long time. So I usually put on this autopilot anytime I have to drive more than 2 miles on like one stretch of road, because then I can just kind of sit back and let the car do all the work for me. And in fact, on this road trip to Scotland, we were driving kind of on motorways for 200 miles at a time. And that was like super chill because like literally the autopilot would just drive all of the way there. The only thing to keep in mind if you're doing this autopilot is that you have to move the steering wheel every 15 seconds or so. Like the car will flash saying, touch the steering wheel, and then you just have to twiddle it a little bit, and then it's like, okay, cool, you're still awake, you're still alive, that's all fine. But if you keep your hands off the steering wheel for too long, then the car starts to flash and go mental, and then it starts to make a sound, and then if you leave it too long, then it will just disable autopilot for the rest of your drive. So it's like the car is punishing you. And the first time I tried this, I remember actually, I had this like bad feeling in my stomach. I was like, oh, I've disappointed my car because I've broken the rules. I'm sorry. But like very quickly you get used to having this kind of position where you've got like one finger on the steering wheel and you can just twiddle it when you see the blue light flashing on your console thing. And it basically means the car drives itself, but it's not so fully autopilot that you can just sit down and have a nap or something. Okay, so autopilot is pretty cool. It's on traffic aware cruise control, so as soon as these cars in front start moving forward, without me having to do anything, it's gonna also move forward. There we go. Yep, I am moving. No hands. Just keeping one hand on the steering wheel just to make sure I can do anything in an emergency. But otherwise, just kind of chill. And it works pretty well. So right now the car is basically driving itself. And I'm very occasionally giving the wheel a slight twiddle when it tells me, just to let it know that I'm still holding onto the wheel and I kind of know what's going on. This one-hand twiddling thing, you actually get used to very quickly, and now 3 months in, I really love using the autopilot, and whenever I'm using it, I still feel, wow, this is absolutely magical how the car is basically driving itself. So for long road trips, if you're going on road trips, this is a total game changer because it just drives for ages at a time. But also, if you're going through traffic, this is a total game changer as well. And like I said, I haven't paid for any further upgrades to the car, so this does not have the full self-driving mode or any kind of automatic lane changes or merging onto the side ramps or anything like that. All it does is just go in a straight line, kind of following the lane and not hitting the car in front of you, which is completely fine for my needs. Maybe when the self-driving capabilities in the UK get better, I'll be upgrading to that. But right now, there is not a lot of difference between non-full self-driving and full self-driving, other than the fact you have to pay £7,000 for it, which is something that I'm not prepared to do just yet. Now, the only bad thing about the autopilot is that you do get occasional moments of fear. So for example, when we were driving in the Scottish Highlands, like up these mountains and down these mountains and stuff, technically the speed limit would be like 60 or 70 miles per hour. And so the car would be trying to go at 60 or 70 miles per hour. But when it's pouring down with rain and you know the road is windy and you know this car's coming in front of you and it just feels, and you know, like you're on the side of a mountain where if you go off the edge, it would be a bad thing. It feels really, really scary to use the autopilot because it still tries to get you to that 60 miles per hour and then you just like, ah. So we used it a little bit while we were in the mountains, but for the most part, we were driving ourselves. It is kind of nice when you're in the mountains and going on windy roads to do it yourself. And I'm sure the autopilot wouldn't have crashed us into something, but it just feels so scary when autopilot is making you go at 60 and you've got a car on like this narrow road coming out and you're like, oh no, please don't hit it. It's like absolutely terrifying. So I personally was too much of a coward to use the autopilot while I was in the mountains, but it was fantastic for the motorway. All right, we've talked about the good stuff. Let's talk about the not so good stuff. And let's start by talking about range anxiety. And this is such a real thing. I'd seen some videos about it, but I didn't quite believe how much of a deal range anxiety is. Now, I've gone for the long range Tesla Model 3, which has an advertised range of 329 miles. And in fairness, when I'm driving in the south of England, where it's not rainy all the time and where the weather is reasonable, I think the car has about a range of about 300 miles. Like, I can get 300 miles on a single charge if I had to. It's not a big deal. But when we were in Scotland and it was windy and freezing and torrentially raining, the car's range was nowhere near that 329 miles. It was in fact closer to 200 miles. And that is such a big difference in terms of range. We also found that we couldn't quite rely on the car's advertised range. So when you set a destination in the Tesla sort of screen thing, it uses Google Maps and it tells you how much battery it thinks you'll have by the time you get to your destination. And there were lots of times on this trip to Scotland where we just didn't trust it because it was projecting we would have like 8% battery left on our destination, but then we would have 8% at that point and we'd have to drive another 15 minutes and we'd be thinking, I don't know if this is worth it. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it to a supercharger the next day. I don't know if we're going to have, like, there's all these extra sort of mental components of driving a Tesla on a long road trip where you really are worried about the range, especially when the weather conditions aren't great. All right, guys, this is a problem. So we've basically run out of battery. We're on 9% charge, which ran out a lot sooner than we were expecting. So now we've come to Edinburgh Airport to try and find a supercharger. But the roads are really windy and we'll kind of feel like we're going to be sick.
There it is.
Oh, we found it. In fairness, when we were on the road trip, we tried our best to conserve battery. Apparently, if you have the actual heating on, it uses more battery, whereas if you just use the heated seats, it uses less battery, so we were kind of using heated seats. It was pretty cold, and so we had to do this juggling of like, well, how do we juggle kind of how cold we are versus making sure we've got enough battery to get to our destination in time. Also, if you're at the point where it reckons you're gonna sort of run out of battery by the time you get to the next charger, it tells you stay under 60 miles per hour to get to your destination with some battery left, otherwise you're gonna run out, or stay under 70 miles per hour or whatever. So that was useful to have, But again, it was a bit annoying because it was like, well, yeah, it is stuff that you have to think about that you really don't have to think about when you have a petrol or a diesel car. So we've talked about range anxiety. Let's now talk about charging. And now this is another whole can of fish, whole kettle of worms. I don't know if that's the right phrase. Kettle of fish, can of worms, who knows? But basically, when it comes to charging, if you're within the supercharger network, it's absolutely fine. Like in most of England and in sort of the south bit of Scotland, there are reasonable amounts of superchargers. And so basically, whenever you need to, you can always slightly, go to a service station, supercharge the car. It takes about an hour to go from 0 to 100%, basically for a full charge. And when you're at the service station, you can do what we do and just eat a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Subway and just kind of chill. All right, we just had some Burger King. The car has charged from 17% up to about 95% in the last... How long have we been here? We've been here about an hour. So an hour for basically a full charge from 17%. That's pretty good vibes. All right, so here is a map of all the different superchargers in England, and you will see there are quite a lot of them in the south of England. But the issue is that when you go into Scotland, and Scotland is where we were going, you really don't have very many at all. So we charged up once in Edinburgh, we charged up in Perth, we charged up in Aviemore and in Inverness, and the sort of area we were exploring was this sort of northern bit of Scotland. And so there was not a single supercharger kind of north and west of Inverness. And it was a problem because we were relying on Scotland's third-party charger network. Now, this is actually a thing. Like they've got like third-party charging points throughout like the North 500 Trail, throughout like the north of Scotland, and you can find them on an app. The problem is that we didn't know that you had to register for one of these in advance and get a physical card, which you would have to plug into these chargers for them to work. The app, for some reason that we were, because we assumed it's the 21st century, it's 2020 guys, surely you can just do stuff on an app. The only thing the app would let us do is use the slow charging features. And so a Tesla supercharger would charge the car from 0 to 100% in 1 hour. A third-party fast charger would probably take a few hours, but would still get you a lot of charge. But then the slow chargers were giving us like 6 kilowatt hours. It was taking like 6 hours to get like 30% battery. Like it was taking absolutely ages to charge the car. Partly, I'm sure this was our fault for not knowing about this thing, but it's one of those things we just didn't think about because like, well, when you have a normal car, you just don't have to worry about charging. But when you have a Tesla Model 3, you really do have to worry about charging. All right, a few more problems. So firstly, in some supercharger destinations for Tesla, in some of them you have like 20 different superchargers, so you know there's always going to be space. But specifically in Edinburgh Airport, where we had to charge up on one morning, we got there and there were already 2 Teslas in the 2 spaces because they only had 2 spaces. And the problem was there was already someone waiting. Okay, this is slightly problematic. So the battery is on 66% at the moment, and we are at Edinburgh Airport trying to supercharge it. But there are already 2 Teslas charging, using up the 2 slots. And there is another Tesla Model 3 that's waiting to charge. So we're in a queue. Now, in theory, we could go all the way up to Aviemore, which will be 124 miles and take 2 hours and 36 minutes. And it reckons we'll be on 20% battery by the time we get there. So the only question is, do we trust the estimation on the Tesla that we're actually gonna have 20% battery by the time we get there? Or is there a risk of running out? The alternative is that we wait here to be supercharged, or we potentially go up to Perth and then supercharge over there. So we've got some options, but I don't think we wanna wait here for an extended period of time just to wait for other cars to get charged up. So this wasn't the end of the world because we did have an option, but it's just one of those things that we didn't think about. I just sort of assumed that when it says there is a supercharger on Tesla on the map thing, you go to the supercharger and you'll find a space, but specifically in Edinburgh Airport, we did not have a space. And now we get to the best part of the trip and the most memorable part of the trip, which was possibly also the worst part of the trip, and that was the charging situation north of Inverness. Some of the time, this was actually completely reasonable. All right, that was actually remarkably painless. We managed to register, set up a payment card and charge the car. Now we're gonna grab some breakfast. But at other times, it was a total nightmare. All right, so it's absolutely pouring down with rain. We are at this third-party charger installation, and we have plugged it into the car, but we're trying to figure out how to actually download the app to pay for it, because it's not entirely obvious how we do that. As we found, for some reason, none of the fast chargers in the whole of Scotland were working for us, and we spoke to some dude who had a Nissan Leaf, and he said, oh yeah, you've got to apply for this EV charging card, and that unlocks the fast chargers. And we were just like, oh my God, why? This is stupid. It's 2020, guys, come on, just like make it available in the app. Why do you have to get a physical card and then you unlock fast charging? All right, update, there is basically no charger in Scotland that can fast charge us, so we're gonna slow charge using AC. And that means we're gonna be here for the next few hours And our sightseeing around Skye is a complete myth because it's not going to happen. But hey, it's raining anyway, so it wasn't going to happen anyway. So for most of the rest of the trip, we were relying on the slow charging of Scotland's third-party electric charging network. This was, again, it was reasonable. We had to change up our route a lot and we couldn't do a lot of the sightseeing that we wanted to do. But in fairness, it was like raining and foggy and misty anyway, and so that would have been pretty grim. But we did spend a lot more time in service stations and in coffee shops than we'd originally expected because we thought this was going to be a road trip to Scotland and to see the sights and take photos and brought the drone along and all that stuff. But sometimes the slow chargers didn't work either. Right, we are trekking 10 minutes to the nearest French restaurant where I can do a wee-wee and we can get some food while we wait for 4 hours for the car to charge. Whoever's idea this was to bring a freaking electric car where the range is not as advertised in the torrential wind and rain. Oh, that person is not very clever, to say the least. This honestly was probably the most memorable and the most grim moment of the trip. It was, we were all wet and miserable and freezing and we had to wait like 6 hours in a coffee shop for the car to charge up to the point where it had like 40% battery, which would get us to our Airbnb by nightfall. And we had to trudge through like 15 minutes of absolutely torrential rain and wind with the umbrellas flying out everywhere and not working to get to this coffee shop because we were in some random Scottish town in the middle of nowhere. All right, so we found a place to shelter in for a couple of hours and, oh, it's you. And we just need to figure out our route to the Airbnb tonight with enough charge. How are you feeling?
Oh, wet, cold, wet, but optimistic.
Yeah man, road trip with the lads.
5 hours later.
All right guys, so we've been hanging out in this cafe for the last few hours. We've charged up from 6% to 46%, which should, in theory, give us a projected range of about 106 miles. And the place we have to get to is 80 miles. So in theory, we should get to our Airbnb with some charge to spare. And there's hopefully another charger closer to our place that'll work. So we're gonna aim for that one. Now, just gonna get the boys to come in the car and we will continue this somewhat miserable, but still quite enjoyable road trip. So overall, we were never quite stranded because of the charging situation, but we did have to massively change up our entire trip because there is that serious anxiety of, guys, there is no way we can run out of battery before we hit our next Airbnb destination. What we're gonna do next time is that we're gonna carry a long ass extension cable, because what you can do is you can plug your Tesla into just a normal wall outlet. And again, this charges slowly. I think it's about 6 to 8 miles per hour of charge. So for every hour of charging, you get about 6 to 8 miles on a Tesla Model 3, which is actually reasonable because if you do it overnight, then 6 times 8 times 12 is 96. You get about 100-ish miles, provided you're leaving it just for 12 hours, and often we were leaving it for more than 12 hours. And so if we carry just a long extension cable and just have it in the back, it means we've got the option of charging overnight at our Airbnbs by just running an extension cable from the house all the way into the car park and being comfortable with charging the car overnight then. And in fact, when the car is parked at home, I don't have a supercharger or anything. I don't have a wall charger. I just use a long ass extension cable connected to the mains and just run it outside so that the Tesla plugs into the mains power supply. In terms of charging costs, we had to charge once at a service station overnight. That cost £21.90 for 100% charge. Overall, our supercharger receipts came to £84.49 and the third-party stations came to about £20, which meant that our total cost of charging for the 1400 miles was £126.39. And actually, this was slightly cheaper than my old Nissan Note, but not by very much. I think it's because the third-party chargers were overcharging us compared to the superchargers. But if I had done this trip on my old 2011 Nissan Note, which has a miles per gallon of about 55, diesel 117p per litre, that would have cost £135.40. So we only really saved about £10, which is about $13, by going Tesla Model 3 long range rather than by going Nissan Note. Let's talk about some more slightly annoying things about the Tesla Model 3, and next we're talking about the passenger experience. Now, when you have 1 or 2 people in the back seat, it's actually very comfortable. It's a very nice ride, it's chill. People are like, oh, these white seats are cool, it's a Tesla Model 3, isn't this novel? But when you have 3 people in the back, it actually becomes quite uncomfortable for them, especially if they're like tall. So all of the guys we had in the back were like between 5'9" and 6 foot, and so reasonably tall. And it was just very, very uncomfortable. I asked one of the guys, Tarek, who was sitting in the back a lot, about how he felt about the comfort level of the car.
The middle is not bad. I think it's on the side where you're kind of angled, where you've got to sort of constantly strain your back. But the middle's good. You can lift your legs up.
And so after the long days of driving, like I would have the lower back pain from being kind of in the driver's seat for a very long time. The person in the passenger seat would be pretty chill because they'd have like nice leg room and it would be good. But the three guys in the back, especially the guys sitting on the sides where your legs are sort of angled into the car, because actually there's not a huge amount of leg room because the battery at the bottom takes up a huge amount of space. So in a normal car, you're sort of sitting in a sort of sitting position, whereas in a Tesla, your knees are sort of a little bit higher, and so you know, you can get the hip flexor pain, you get the lower back pain. These things aren't like relevant if you're just in the car for like an hour or two, but if you're in the car for like 12 hours of the day, you really start to notice it. And therefore, each night we would put on this like mobility and stretching routine at the nighttime just to try and get the pain out of our backs. The nice things about the passenger experience though are that the seats in the back are heated as well, so that was kind of novel, and it's got two USB-C charging ports at the back, so no one's phone was ever at risk of running out of battery. Next, let's talk about the in-car entertainment and the sound system. So everyone says that when you're in a Tesla, the sound system is fantastic, and yeah, it was pretty good. But, you know, when we're driving on motorways for extended periods of time, it actually is really, really, really loud. And I was kind of hoping the Tesla Model 3 would be a lot quieter than it actually is. It's like ridiculously quiet if you're driving at under 30 miles per hour because you don't hear the noise of the engine, because there is no noise of the engine. But when you're driving on a motorway and there's rain and other cars outside, you actually get a lot of and it just feels like you're in a normal car. And honestly, I don't notice much of a subjective difference between the sort of road noise in the Tesla Model 3 versus the road noise in my Nissan Note, which also had the sound of the engine. And so if we wanted to listen to music or a podcast or an audiobook while driving on a motorway, you would have to have the volume pretty loud, like about 80%, to be able to hear what was being said. Again, this is something I sort of wish I'd known beforehand, because I kind of had high hopes, high expectations about the Tesla Model 3, people saying, oh, it's so quiet. And I thought, oh my God, I'll be able to silently listen to my audiobook while driving on a motorway, but that is absolutely not the case. If you're driving slowly on, you know, city roads with lots of traffic, yes, you don't hear any noise, but if you're driving on a motorway, you get a shit ton of noise and it's really annoying. The nice thing about the in-car entertainment system is that you do have that big screen, and so some of the time when we were at pit stops or if we were stopping at a service station or at a third-party charging station to charge the car, instead of getting out, we would sit in the car and we would watch stuff on the screen. So it's got YouTube, it's got Netflix, and when you buy the car, you get 1 free year of like Tesla connectivity. And then I think it costs about £10 a month after that. So you get like unlimited internet straight into your car, which is quite nice. So we would occasionally watch clips from What I Lie to You. I think we even put on a Netflix show at one point, and that was like a surprisingly good experience. So that's like a nice part of having the car. Your charging stops stop being annoying, and you're actually just like, hey, I can just watch something on TV. Finally, let's do a comparison with a normal car. So what would it have been like to do the road trip in the Nissan Note, my old 2011 car that I've got 180,000 miles on the clock that I've been driving since like 2016. Honestly, I think the trip would have been less hassle if we had a petrol or diesel car, because you just don't have to worry about the charging. But I also think it would have been less fun. And like for us, the point of this road trip wasn't really to see the sights. It was more just to hang out with the boys and just to have a nice time. And when you have this thing of this shared adversity, this like shared chaotic experience, so somewhat traumatizing experience when you're struggling to find chargers and the range anxiety, and the fact that the car's range is not as advertised in cold and windy and wet weather conditions, and the fact that you're freezing cold and soaked to the bone and your umbrellas aren't working because the winds are too heavy, all of that stuff. We wouldn't really have had that if we were just going in a normal car, or if we'd rented like a 4x4 or something. We would have been a lot more comfortable, but I think we would have had a lot less fun. And I think in a way, that trip was a good bonding experience. And it was a bonding experience because of the adversity and because of the struggle. And therefore, in a way, it was kind of good that we took the trip in a Tesla Model 3. We are planning another road trip in a few months' time, and it remains to be seen whether the guys will want to go back in the Tesla. I'm all for it because the driver's seat is really comfortable. Or whether the guys will just think, you know what, let's just hire a 4x4, you know, Land Rover or something, whatever, and just have a big comfortable car that we can just use for the weekend. I suspect that's probably the road that we're going to go down. So that was overall the experience of driving a Tesla Model 3 for a 1,400-mile road trip. Overall, I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, but certainly not a stress-free experience. If you like this video, you should check out the video over here where I talk about how I bought my Tesla half price, or you can check out the video over here, which talks about the delivery day and the experience of driving the car for the first time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.